just go right to the mic. Just go out to the mic.
Me? Okay.
There were the questions, I think. Go ahead.
Okay.
So what was your message to Cabinet today?
We are looking at a new economic world order, and it's time to flip the script on what it is we're trying to do with the federal government in an era of slowing growth and tremendous pressures with respect to health care, housing, and immigration.
And so what does that mean, flip the switch? What needs to be different?
Flip the script. Just like we need to talk about how we are spending to deal with the problems that we have to face in immigration, in housing, and in the care economy. That's not just healthcare, it's long-term care and childcare too. Without those basics, we are not going to be in the vaunted position we have been for many years now. We're the 8th largest economy in the world. We can be and do anything we want to do. We have to start doing it.
What's your sense of, there's been some talk about how the government doesn't have very much fiscal room left. The new fiscal guardrails and the Feds with the 1% cap on deficits coming in a couple of years. What's your sense of how they're grappling with that, and what do you think of that claim that there's not much more room to spend?
I don't know how they're grappling with it. I think my recommendation would be is you have more room than most governments do in the world. We actually have more room than the United States does, and we have the best credit rating in the world. And we're one of a handful of countries that can sell our bonds anywhere. So again, we can do and be anything we want to be.
What about the other side of the coin? I mean, you're talking about how we're spending the money that we have or the money we can borrow, but is there any talk today about economic growth, about industrial policy basically adding to the economy?
100%. There was a conversation about that, and the fact is that we need the basics of society, housing, food, care, to be dealt with before you build the superstructure of industrial growth, and that they are not paying enough attention to that, in my view. And the fact that, we are dealing with it as if everybody's got a home and everybody's like doing fine, except we're worried about food prices. That is not the story. There are more 25 to 40-year-olds in this country than people over the age of 65, and they are struggling to keep a roof over their heads. This is not the version of Canada we thought we would be facing at this point.
And so what was the solution to that? What was the solution you proposed to that?
I think we really do need to have governments invest in the basics, and also maybe call back some of our pension funds. One of the biggest stories this year in 2024 is the amount of dry powder that is out there. You'll remember Chrystia Freeland used the term dry powder in 2022. She wanted to keep the powder dry just in case we had a recession. We probably are going to have a recession in the first part of this year. We're probably in the middle of one right now, and it's going to get worse. But the term dry powder comes from private equity, and it is the amount of ready cash that is ready to spend. They're not borrowing from anybody. They got cash to burn. And it has reached $2.5 trillion. And everywhere around the world, it is going into things like housing and the care economy, right? Like, we know it's coming to a neighborhood near us, and we don't have a plan for how to repatriate our own pension funds and our own capital to deal with the needs that we have. More of our money flows out to invest in basic infrastructure in other countries than it does here. We can do better on that, and we absolutely cannot fix the care economy, which is foundational. It is not derivative. It is not an afterthought. It is those people go to work so you can go to work. We need to make sure that that focus on the care economy now translates from affordability to the workforce itself, because we are losing people there. It is the only part of the economy that continues to see rising vacancies as well as rising employment. It is not a great place to work in long-term care, in childcare, and too often in healthcare. So these are things that can be fixed in collaboration with the provinces, and you can do it in collaboration with the provinces by putting strings on the money that you send them, right? If these things don't change, then why are we sending you money?
They know how to get this money out the door. I mean, they put a lot of money in the infrastructure bank. There's money sitting in the super clusters that haven't been spent. Do you think they have the capacity, the know-how, the intent, whatever, to get the money out the door into these projects, hospitals, houses, so on?
Well, that goes to the point about economic growth. We're talking about two different orders of spending investment. The stuff I'm talking about, housing and care, and the number of people you bring into the country to deal with the labor shortages, are foundational. And yes, they do know how to get that money out the door. Yes, they do know how to work with communities to do that. It's the other stuff. It's like, where do we build? Where do we grow? The icing on the cake, which is the productivity story, which is a mess of measurement and a mess of lack of understanding how to deal with this. I said to somebody recently, if you think we know how to fix productivity, don't ask me, ask David Dodge and Don Drummond, who were in charge when they literally threw the book at the problem. They deregulated, they privatized, they cut taxes, and business investment continued to plummet. We don't know how to do productivity, and we don't measure it. So don't focus on that. Focus on the stuff you know, how to get access to housing, care, all the stuff you know people need to do to be able to go to work and be productive. And they do know how to do that. Whether they'll do that or not is a big question, because the counter narrative is if you spend, you will trigger inflation, which is patently untrue. That is not what happened, but there is a very vigorous debate about that out there.
$10 a day childcare and how that's going and actually rolling out, because obviously you've been the key expert on that for a few years now. How's it actually working?
Number one, I'm not the key expert. Number two, I'm not going to tell you what we talked about. Any other questions?
Do you get the impression that this government knows what's happening out there, like that understands the dire straits that some Canadians find themselves in?
I am also not going to talk to you about what the impression is I have of the government. That isn't my job. I can tell you what I was invited with Kevin to talk about, and you should probably ask him some questions.
On some of this?
Sure. So I'm Kevin Milligan. I'm professor of economics at UBC. Happy to take a couple of questions.
Can you talk about the productivity issue? Do you see that the same way? Or are there, like, this is a, whatever, decades-long problem?
Yeah. So, we want to have a growing economy. We want to have productivity growth and GDP growth. And, we're kind of at a crossroads right now in the economy. We're now at a place where wage growth is going faster than prices growth. So wages are higher than inflation right now. And that's great, right? Because we went through 30 years of stagnating middle class incomes. Now we're at a place where wages are growing faster than prices. This is good. This is what we want. So the question is, how can we sustain that? And that gets to the question of productivity. So we need to have investment in plant and equipment and new software and all of those things. That's true, we need that. But we also need to make sure that the workers have the skills, the education, that transition from schools into the workplace, transition for people from struggling communities into the workplace and into those middle class jobs. And so that's the kind of thing that a government can work on. They can try to help the private sector to invest more in Canadians' work. But that's where I'd love to see our economy go, is to sustain that growing wages faster than prices so that we have that growing middle class.
Do you agree with Armine on the idea of investing more heavily in the care economy rather than focusing on this chase to boost productivity through government-directed policy and spending?
Yeah, so I don't see those things as in total opposition. And one example of that is thinking about making workers productive on the job. You think about if someone is worried about their elderly relative in a long-term care home, or worrying about a child care arrangement, that's weight on their shoulders. They cannot devote themselves entirely to their job. If we do a good job in the care economy, that relieves the rest of us of the stress of those things, and we can just focus on our jobs and be more productive where we are. So I just don't see those as opposites. I see them as working together.
For both of you advise more significant government spending as part of sort of the next response or next phase of the government's work?
Yeah, I'm not into advising them exactly which program to expand or not. It's more a framework of what are the important questions. Where are we in the Canadian economy? I just see that we're at a big crossroads where we have now wages growing faster than prices, and that's what we want to sustain. And so they have to think, and they have to ask their policy teams to work on policies that can get us to that goal.
Like, what specifically could the government be doing in order to encourage or further that?
So working on things like the care economy, as Armine has emphasized, is one aspect. Another aspect is making sure that firms have all the incentives they need to invest in their workers here in Canada. Third, thinking about education, and specifically that transition from education into the workplace, whether that's traineeships and summer jobs and all of those kinds of things. Those programs exist. I think we have to take a good look at them, because I think that's the kind of thing that can improve that transition, improve the productivity of our workers, and give hope to the younger generation that the middle class is going to be there for them. They'll get that stable paycheck. the way they get that is to get their foot in the door of the labor market, and the government has some role to play there.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks very much.